Hi everyone, I'm Tyler and you're watching Equinox Games. Today, we're going to be talking about making decisions regarding game design. Game design is a huge topic with nearly infinite depth, so I'm only going to be scratching the very surface with this video. Specifically, we're going to be talking about making decisions about the broad strokes of the design of the game, rather than decisions regarding level design or calculating the right values for a specific game function. So, let's get started. What exactly is game design, and why is it so important to a game? Game design is the framework that defines how everything in a game works. It's not directly related to programming the game, making art assets for the game, making music for the game, or anything like that. However, it defines how all of those things are done when you are making a game. Having a well-designed game leads to robustness of the game, solving a lot of headaches from refactoring the code or redrawing assets when changes are made. A game that is made without any design decisions will eventually lead to making things very difficult to add or take away from, leaving behind just a massive monolith of game development that doesn't really have a purpose. That's another really good way to describe game design. Game design is the framework that defines the purpose of your game. The broad strokes of game design should be made very early into development. These are decisions like, what genres will a game be? Or, what games are the inspiration for this game? Having a really strong core game design will help you have a more defined vision for your game. In addition, answering these important questions early on will help you make subsequent game decisions. In addition, answering these questions early on will help you make subsequent game decisions. In addition, answering these important questions early on will help you make subsequent game design decisions. For example, suppose that early on I decided to make a farming game where I have to defend my farm at night from the undead. I decided that the important parts of my game's design were farming, undead, and combat with the undead. Later on in development, I might be at a point where I was adding new weapons to the game, and I'm stuck because I can't think of any interesting weapons. Since I had defined my game to be largely about farming and undead, I could use those two words to define the theme for some of these weapons. I could add in a bone club, which drops from undead that I defeat, or I could add pitchforks, which could be available from the game shop. This is a really simple example, but I think it showcases the point I'm trying to make. The design of your game is really important to define as early on as you can, because it helps a ton when making new decisions about your game, so that the game stays on target. Now that we've discussed what game design is, and why it's important to work on it, the question becomes, well, how do I get better at game design? That's a much harder question to answer. I am by no means an expert at game design, but I have done quite a bit of making these important game design decisions, so I do have some advice to give. The first piece of advice that I'll give is the same advice that I'm sure you'll hear a lot as you watch more of my channel. If you want to get better at game design, you have to practice. And then, you have to practice some more. So many skills require tons of time to actually get proficient in, so you have to put the time in to get better at them. There are a few ways to practice your game design decision making. A way that I've practiced is through making my own D&D campaigns. Making your own game content is a great way to get better at designing games. You'll learn about rule systems, balancing, theming, and so many more things. As you learn more about these game systems, you'll be able to transfer your knowledge to more games, and understand what makes games fun. When it comes to game design specifically, there is another way that I consider valuable to get better, and that is by playing more games. Video games, board games, card games, all sorts of games. Games are all bound by the goal to entertain, and by playing more games, you'll get a better feel for what sorts of games and systems you find fun, and what other players find fun. So I definitely recommend trying out some games that you haven't yet, and being mindful of what things you dislike and what things you like, and what changes you would make to these games to make them better. I also have some more specific models of thinking when it comes to game design that I think will help you in making these decisions. These are definitely not the only ways to design a game. They are just tools that I like to use when designing ideas for my game. The first method I have comes from Matt Colville at MCDM. He did an awesome video about keywords when designing a game. I've heard this same idea be called pillars, but the idea is the same. The way this method works is, when you're designing a game at a broad scope, you define several keywords that describe your game in its entirety. I personally recommend between 3 and 5 keywords. For example, in his video, Matt described 4 keywords that he and his team defined for their RPG: tactical, heroic, cinematic, fantasy. By defining these 4 keywords for their game, they had made very specific choices about the design of their game, which would help them make so many decisions down the road when designing classes and monsters for their game. I'll link the video down in the description. Another example of this method I have is one of my own. I'm working on a West Marches style D&D campaign right now to play with my friends. However, there are a lot of things I don't like about D&D 5th edition, especially for playing in such an exploration heavy game. So, I decided to give 5th edition an overhaul that was tailor-made for my campaign. Right when I started, I decided to define keywords for my campaign, and by extension, for this overhaul module. The keywords I decided on were deliberate, rewarding, high fantasy. Deliberate, in the sense that a player's actions should have well-defined consequences, so that the players can feel like their actions affect their environment. Rewarding, meaning that characters should be rewarded for playing and interacting with the game, which helped me decide that it should be by exploring that characters grow and progress rather than just getting XP. And high fantasy, meaning that combat between players and monsters should be epic and that intrigue and mystery will not play a huge role in this game. So, we've seen that keywords are a really powerful yet simple way to define your game from the get-go. They can help when making further decisions about your game because you can just ask yourself, does this fit within the keywords I've defined? The second method I have for you today is much more loosely defined than the keywords method. I call it the what if method. It's a really simple method, but I found it to be able to help me to come up with lots of ideas that I had never considered before. The way this method works is you ask yourself a hypothetical question that doesn't really make sense at first glance. For example, as a bit of a callback to earlier in the video, you might ask yourself the question, what if Doom Guy took up farming? Which, after considering a while, might lead you to the farming undead fighting game that we talked about earlier. I've used this fairly recently when brainstorming ideas for what my first official game should be. My newly started game, Stormborn, started because I asked myself the question, what if a turn-based RPG had a style meter, like Devil May Cry or Ultrakill? This informed several decisions about my new game, a lot of which still need to be finalized, but it has helped me form a really interesting premise and helped me inform a lot of design decisions about the art style and gameplay so far. So, that's the video everyone. We talked about a whole lot today. We started with what is game design, and why is it important for us to do all this designing up front. We talked about how to get better at game design, which is by practicing and by playing more games. And we talked about 2 specific methods of designing games, which were the keywords method and the what if method. So if you have any thoughts or questions about the video, leave them down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, more videos about game design and game development as a whole, please subscribe and hit the bell, and we'll see you next time.